The evening was soft, ordinary, the kind of night that made life feel safe. In the quiet suburb of Maplewood, the houses lined the streets like sentinels, their windows glowing amber, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Inside one modest home, the Thompson family was preparing for an outing, a rare date night for parents always consumed by work. "Remember, honey, bedtime at 8:30, Mrs. Thompson said, brushing her daughter Lily's tangled hair with practiced care. 10-year-old Lily squirmed slightly, tugging at the strands with restless energy. "And no jumping off the couch, Lily," her father added, tying his tie. 11-year-old Max grinned, tossing a small toy car across the living room. "I'll be good, Dad." The babysitter, a 25-year-old woman named Clara Whitman, stood quietly in the kitchen, her hands folded in front of her. Her hair, a dark chestnut brown, was pinned neatly, her smile measured, polite. She nodded at the children. "I've got everything under control. You'll have a great night." Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Famous Crime Cases, where we uncover stories that challenge what you think you know about humanity. Mr. Thompson's gaze lingered a moment longer than usual. Clara had been babysitting for 3 years. Reliable, cheerful, always accommodating. But tonight he felt a fleeting, almost imperceptible chill. He shook it off. "We'll be back by 10. Don't let anything happen." Clara's smile didn't falter. "Nothing will happen," she said softly, her voice warm, almost melodic. Yet, as the parents kissed their children goodbye and stepped out into the crisp evening, a shadow flickered across Clara's expression. A hesitation, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her eyes harden for a second before she smoothed them back into the practiced calm. As the door clicked shut, silence fell. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and the children's whispers. Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit. "Max, do you think Clara will be nice tonight?" Max shrugged, too used to routine to worry. "She's always nice." But the air felt different. Something in Clara's posture, the way she watched them, so still, so calculating, sent a subtle ripple of unease. She busied herself in the kitchen, checking the stove, the locks, her movements unnervingly precise. For the first 30 minutes, everything seemed normal. They played board games, laughed softly, the ordinary evening unfolding like any other. But small things began to shift, tiny signs that only someone paying attention could notice. A hand lingered on the doorknob longer than necessary. A glance at the clock seemed almost ritualistic. And when Lily accidentally knocked over a glass of juice, Clara's reaction was a fraction too sharp, a tightness in her smile that made the children exchange worried looks. The camera of human intuition was on, even if they couldn't articulate it. Something was coming, though none of them, parents, children, or even Clara, yet knew how quickly the ordinary night would fracture. The living room lights were dimmed now, the golden glow from the lamp casting soft shadows across the walls. Lily and Max sat cross-legged on the rug, piecing together a puzzle that had been their evening entertainment. Clara perched in the armchair nearby, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze flicking between the children with an intensity that seemed almost imperceptible, but it was there. At first, her behavior was just precise. Too precise. Every movement calculated, every word chosen. When Max tried to reach for a puzzle piece near the edge of the coffee table, Clara's hand shot out before he could even touch it. "Careful, Max," she said, her voice smooth, almost too calm. "We don't want any accidents." Max frowned but nodded, accepting the scolding with a shrug. Lily, however, stared at Clara, a tiny furrow in her brow. "Why did you move my piece?" she asked softly. Clara tilted her head, her smile polite but faintly cold. "I just thought it would be better over here, darling. Trust me, you'll see." The words should have reassured the children, but instead they produced a strange, prickling feeling in the pit of Lily's stomach. She hugged her rabbit tighter and whispered to Max, "Something's different tonight." Max shrugged again, but his eyes lingered on Clara longer than usual. Something in her gaze, so steady, so calculating, made him feel watched. It started with little things. Clara insisted that the children wash their hands 3 times before dinner. She moved items around the kitchen and living room as though arranging them according to some invisible plan. When Lily tried to reach for a glass, Clara's hand hovered like a shadow, not touching, but controlling. "Clara, why are you doing that?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's for your safety," Clara replied, her tone unwavering, her smile perfectly in place. "You'll thank me later." The unease built like a slow, rising tide. The children couldn't explain it. There was no immediate threat, no sharp words, no harsh gestures. Yet everything felt off. Each movement Clara made carried a weight, a subtle authority that made their own choices feel secondary. Dinner was served at the table, the plates lined neatly with sandwiches, fruit, and milk. Max reached for a sandwich, but Clara's hand gently, but firmly, guided his. "Not yet," she said softly. "We wait until everyone's ready." Lily's eyes widened. "But I'm ready." Clara's smile didn't waver. "Patience, my dear. It's all about timing." The words themselves were harmless, even polite. But the way she said them, the exactness of her movements, the attention she paid to every tiny detail, it all made the children tense, alert, unsure. Something was being controlled, something beyond their understanding. After dinner, Clara suggested they play a game. Trust game, she called it. It sounded innocent enough. The children were to follow her instructions precisely, or else. She never said what would happen if they didn't. But the implication hung in the air like a shadow. The game started simply enough. Touch the red pillow, then the blue one, then stand on the rug with both feet together. They complied. But as the game progressed, the instructions became increasingly strict, almost ceremonial. Clara's voice remained calm, even sweet, but the weight of her authority pressed down like an invisible hand on their small shoulders. "You're doing very well," she said, but her eyes flicked to the clock with a precision that felt rehearsed. "We must always stay on schedule. Discipline is important." The children exchanged nervous glances. Something about the way she spoke, the way she controlled even their tiniest actions, made them realize that this wasn't just a game. Clara was testing boundaries, observing reactions, measuring control. The tension escalated further when she insisted on checking their pockets for hidden toys that could cause chaos. Max tried to protest, but Clara's calm insistence left him with no room to argue. She patted his pockets and then Lily's, her hands lingering slightly longer than necessary. "Always be honest with me," she said softly. "We must be careful, especially when no one else is watching." The line of ordinary night and subtle menace blurred. Clara's outward warmth contrasted sharply with the quiet control she exerted, leaving the children simultaneously trusting and terrified. By the time the parents were halfway through their dinner out, the children were tense, wary. The safe, ordinary night had shifted imperceptibly, yet completely. Lily hugged her rabbit tighter, whispering again to Max, "Something's wrong. I just know it." Max wanted to brush it off, but even he couldn't ignore the tightness in Clara's smile, the sharp precision in her movements, the way she measured every second. The tension was invisible to anyone outside the room, yet it wrapped around them like a cold, heavy blanket. And as Clara stood to check the clock again, a subtle shadow passed across her face. A flicker of something darker, something not yet revealed, something that would soon change everything. The clock ticked slowly, each second marking the passage of a night that felt increasingly heavy. The parents' absence had once seemed like a minor adventure to the children, time alone with someone they trusted. But now, in the dim lamplight of the living room, the ordinary evening had transformed into a landscape of unease. Clara's smile remained, but it had changed. It was no longer just polite. It was measured, deliberate, and faintly chilling. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, glinted in the soft light, scanning the room with a precision that felt almost predatory. "Lily," Clara said, kneeling in front of her, "why don't we have a little secret between us? A game only for adults and very special children." Lily's stomach nodded. She had played games before, innocent little tasks meant to pass the time. But something in Clara's tone made her shrink back, hugging her rabbit tighter. "But I don't think so," she whispered. Clara tilted her head, the movement slow, deliberate. "Oh, come now. Secrets can be fun. But only if we trust each other completely." Max exchanged a worried glance with his sister. The air had grown taut with an invisible tension. He swallowed hard, realizing that Clara was no longer merely a babysitter. She was a force they could neither predict nor ignore. As Clara led them to the hallway, the children noticed subtle changes in the environment. Doors that were usually left open were now firmly shut. Curtains were drawn tight, casting shadows across the walls. Every step they took echoed unnaturally, filling the space with a sense of isolation. "You see," Clara said, her voice soft but compelling, "sometimes adults make mistakes. And sometimes, children have to learn lessons the hard way. Tonight is one of those nights." Her words were simple, almost casual, but they carried an unspoken weight. Lily's eyes widened. She glanced at Max, who looked back with a mix of fear and confusion. Neither child fully understood what Clara meant, but instinct told them something was very wrong. The game intensified. Clara instructed them to perform tasks that were increasingly strange and controlling, arranging books by size, touching only certain objects, walking in precise patterns across the carpet. Each instruction was accompanied by a calm, unwavering gaze that made disobedience almost impossible. "You see, children," Clara said, "the world is not as kind as your parents make it seem. Sometimes we must practice obedience, practice attention, practice fear." The word lingered in the air. Fear. Max's hands trembled slightly. "Why do we have to be afraid?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Clara's smile was soft, almost tender. "Because fear is a teacher. And tonight, you are learning lessons that most people never have to learn until it's too late." The first shock came quietly. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were photographs of the children, taken in moments they hadn't noticed. Playing in the backyard, eating lunch, brushing teeth. Every picture captured them unawares. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. How did you take these?" Clara's eyes glinted. "I watch. I observe. That is my job." Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. But beneath it, a darkness simmered, a carefully hidden obsession with control and surveillance. The children realized then that Clara's behavior was not random or playful. Every instruction, every glance, every word had been part of a meticulous plan. She had been studying them, manipulating them, testing the limits of obedience and fear. A sense of dread settled over Lily and Max. They were trapped in a carefully controlled world, isolated and observed. The ordinary night, once filled with laughter and trust, had shifted into something else entirely. Yet even as fear tightened its grip, a flicker of defiance sparked. Max whispered to Lily, "We can't let her win. We have to think." Lily nodded subtly, clutching her rabbit. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a tiny flame of courage, small, fragile, but undeniable. Clara, noticing the subtle exchange, smiled to herself. "The children are thinking," she murmured. "Good. That makes it more interesting." But she underestimated them. The power she wielded, the authority she had assumed over the night, was beginning to show cracks. Even in the grip of fear, children have instincts, resourcefulness, and a resilience adults often forget. The tension escalated further when Clara insisted they follow her to the basement. "There is one final lesson," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "One last secret to teach." Max's heart pounded. The basement was always off-limits unless a parent was present. Shadows pooled in the corners, the air damp and cold. But Clara's control left little room for protest. As they descended the stairs, the children's minds raced. Fear mixed with a growing determination. They realized that survival was no longer just about obedience. It was about understanding Clara's motives, anticipating her next move, and finding a way to reclaim control. In that dimly lit basement, with shadows swallowing the corners and Clara's eyes glinting in the soft glow of a single overhead bulb, the ordinary evening had irrevocably ended. The hidden truth was out. Clara was not just a babysitter. She was a manipulator, an observer, a threat that would test the children's courage, their wits, and their will to resist. And in that moment, the first shift in power began, not Clara's, but the children's. The basement smelled faintly of damp concrete and old wood. Shadows clung to the corners, distorting shapes into something almost monstrous. Clara's smile remained calm, her voice soft and coaxing, but the children were no longer merely passive. Something had shifted. Max's heart pounded in his chest, but he took a deep breath and whispered to Lily, "We can't let her see us panic. We have to think." Lily nodded, clutching her rabbit. "What do we do?" "Observe. Learn. Wait for the right moment," Max replied, trying to sound braver than he felt. Clara instructed them to sit on the cold concrete floor, placing the photographs she had taken earlier in front of them. "Look carefully," she said, her tone deceptively gentle. "Notice the mistakes, the flaws. Life is about observing and correcting." The children complied at first, eyes darting nervously across the images. But then, slowly, a plan began to form in Max's mind. He realized that Clara had a pattern. She liked control, order, predictability. She assumed compliance. If they could break that pattern, even subtly, she could lose her grip. He leaned slightly to the side, knocking over one photograph accidentally, or so it seemed. Clara's sharp gaze flicked down immediately. "Max, be careful," she said softly, kneeling closer. But the children had learned to mask fear with compliance. Max's eyes stayed calm. Meanwhile, Lily took a careful inventory of the basement. There was a small window near the ceiling, its latch old but functional. A broom leaned against the wall, an extension cord coiled nearby. The tools were mundane, but with the right timing, any of them could become instruments of their escape. Clara, sensing something, circled them slowly. "You two are clever," she murmured. "Cleverness can be useful or dangerous." Her eyes lingered on Max's deliberate misstep. "Let's see how clever you truly are." The children's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of reclaiming agency. They began to cooperate silently, communicating with nods, glances, subtle gestures. They would follow Clara's instructions superficially, but they were already planning their moves. The first opportunity came when Clara left the basement briefly, carrying the notebook of photographs upstairs. The latch of the basement door clicked softly behind her. Max froze, then whispered, "Now, Lily, check the window." The window opened with a hesitant push. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of the night outside. It was a narrow escape, not enough for both, but enough for a plan to form. They could distract her, create a delay, and gain access to the main door. Clara returned, her footsteps soft but precise. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked, her voice like velvet, but with steel beneath it. Lily's reply was small, trembling, but truthful. "Nothing, Clara. Just talking." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. She bent down to inspect the photographs on the floor. "Very well," she said. "But remember, honesty is rewarded, deception is punished." Her gaze lingered on them, calculating as though she could see into their minds. Yet the cracks in her control were growing. Her calm demeanor had begun to falter under the pressure of the children's subtle defiance. Max and Lily realized she had underestimated them, their courage, their observation, their ability to act when necessary. Max made a decision. "We need a distraction," he whispered. Something small, but enough to make her look away for a moment. Lily glanced at the broom. She carefully pushed it across the floor, making it fall with a clatter as if it had slipped. Clara's head snapped toward the sound. Max used the moment to edge toward the stairs. "You two are testing me," Clara said, her voice still soft, but now with an edge. Her hand reached for the notebook, but it was too late. The children were moving, coordinated and deliberate. Step by step, they navigated the stairs, hearts pounding, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The basement was no longer a place of fear, it was a battlefield of wit and courage. At the top of the stairs, the living room door was in sight. Max pushed it open slowly, holding it ajar for Lily. They could hear Clara approaching behind them, but her calm had broken further. Her movements were faster, less precise, tinged with frustration. "Stop!" Clara called, her voice sharper, almost panicked. You cannot escape." But the children didn't hesitate. They ran toward the front door, fumbling with the lock that the parents had set carefully but not perfectly. With one final push, the door opened, letting in the cool night air. Clara reached for them, but Max and Lily were already outside, gasping, hearts racing, not from fear alone, but from the exhilaration of reclaiming control. The power had shifted. She could no longer dominate them. Neighbors, alerted by the commotion, appeared in the street. Clara, seeing the eyes of others upon her, froze. Authority had returned in a different form: community, witnesses, accountability. Her control evaporated like mist in sunlight. Max and Lily ran into the arms of their parents, who had returned unexpectedly early, sensing something amiss. Relief, anger, and disbelief collided in the briefest of moments. Clara's facade cracked entirely. The polite, composed babysitter vanished, replaced by someone exposed, powerless, and desperate. In that night, in the quiet suburban street, the balance of power had shifted completely. The children had survived, not through obedience, but through courage, observation, and teamwork. Clara's carefully orchestrated control was broken. And though the night had been terrifying, it ended with a lesson far greater than any game or photograph could teach. Even in the presence of manipulation and fear, courage, intelligence, and unity can reclaim what seems lost. The night air hit them like a shock as Max and Lily sprinted toward the street. Their parents, alarmed by the sudden movement and the children's terrified expressions, ran to meet them. Clara's presence lingered behind, a dark shadow framed in the doorway, her calm composure finally fracturing into something raw and volatile. "You can't leave," she called, her voice sharp now, almost pleading, almost threatening. "You don't understand. You don't know what's at stake." But Max and Lily didn't look back. Fear had transformed into determination. They were no longer powerless. They had survived her manipulations, outsmarted her traps, and reclaimed their agency. Mrs. Thompson scooped Lily into her arms, her face a mix of relief and horror. Mr. Thompson grabbed Max's shoulders, holding him close. The children clung to their parents, gasping for breath, their small bodies trembling, not just from the night's terror, but from the profound relief of being safe. Clara's eyes darted around, calculating, her previous precision slipping. For the first time, she realized she had underestimated her observers, the children, the parents, the world outside. Her authority, once absolute in that house, had dissolved. "You think you've won," she said, voice shaking, "but you don't understand what I see. What I know." "Enough, Clara," Mr. Thompson said firmly, stepping forward. "You've endangered these children. Your games end here." Clara's hands shook as she reached for the notebook of photographs. In her mind, it had been a tool of control, a symbol of her power. But now it was meaningless. The presence of witnesses, the return of authority, and the courage of the children rendered it powerless. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors had called them upon seeing Clara's agitation and the children running outside. Clara froze, her face paling as the reality of consequence began to sink in. "You don't understand," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "I was only trying to teach them. To prepare them." "Prepare them for what?" Mrs. Thompson demanded, her voice trembling with fury. "Fear? Control? Obedience at the expense of safety?" The words struck Clara, piercing through the carefully constructed rationalizations she had built. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, not as a teacher, not as a guardian, but as a manipulator, a threat, a danger that had preyed on innocence. When the police arrived, Clara attempted to flee, but the officers were quick. She was restrained, questioned, and ultimately taken into custody. The notebook, the photographs, the tools of her obsession, all were confiscated as evidence. The children, safe in their parents' arms, looked on with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Yet there was pride there too, an understanding that they had faced something terrifying and survived, not because adults had saved them alone, but because they had been clever, brave, and united. The confrontation had stripped Clara of her power entirely. What had been a controlled, orchestrated night of fear and manipulation ended in exposure, accountability, and justice. The ordinary world had reasserted itself, not through luck, but through courage and morality. Lily whispered to Max, clutching her rabbit, "We did it. We really did it." Max nodded, a small, confident smile forming. "We stayed smart. We stayed together. That's what mattered." The parents enveloped them in a protective embrace, tears streaming. The horror of the evening had not gone unnoticed, and the lessons were heavy. But in that moment, relief and justice mingled. The children had survived, Clara had been exposed, and the moral balance had been restored. Even in the aftermath, the neighborhood remained quiet, ordinary, deceptively peaceful. Yet the night had changed the Thompsons forever. Trust, vigilance, courage, these were no longer abstract concepts but living, breathing lessons. The children had learned that even when confronted with fear, one could reclaim agency, challenge authority when necessary, and survive with intellect and heart intact. And for Clara, the carefully constructed power she had wielded dissolved completely, leaving only the stark consequences of her actions, a reckoning both legal and moral. The Thompson household, once vibrant and warm, now felt quiet in a different way. The lingering tension of the night still hovered in the corners, like a shadow that refused to leave entirely. Yet the air was no longer heavy with fear, it was charged with relief, gratitude, and the quiet hum of lessons learned the hard way. Clara Whitman had been taken into custody, her notebook and photographs catalogued as evidence of her manipulations. Legal consequences awaited her, and in the eyes of the community, her carefully maintained image was shattered. She was no longer the composed, polite babysitter the Thompsons had trusted. The power she had wielded over the children had vanished, replaced by accountability and scrutiny. The children, Max and Lily, were exhausted but awake with adrenaline. They sat on the living room floor, huddled with their parents. Their eyes were wide, but no longer filled with terror. Instead, there was a quiet resilience, a recognition of what they had endured and overcome. Mrs. Thompson reached out, holding Lily's small hands. "You both were so brave tonight," she said, voice trembling. "Brave and smart. You stayed together and stayed calm. That's why you're safe." Lily hugged her mother tightly. "We were scared," she admitted, "but we knew we had to think. Max and we figured it out together." Mr. Thompson rested a hand on Max's shoulder, pride and relief mingling on his face. "That's right, son. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about facing the fear and finding a way through it." The parents exchanged a glance, a shared acknowledgement that their trust, while tested, had been a fragile part of the night's story. They realized the importance of vigilance, of listening to the instincts of their children, and of understanding that safety is never guaranteed simply because someone appears trustworthy. The community, alerted by the chaos, rallied around the Thompsons. Neighbors brought food, comfort, and kind words. The ordeal became a story not of terror alone, but of collective protection, support, and resilience. Clara's actions, though shocking, had exposed the fragility of trust and the strength that comes when vigilance, courage, and unity converge. In the days that followed, the legal system took its course. Clara faced charges of endangerment, psychological manipulation, and invasion of privacy. The children's testimony, brave and clear, formed the cornerstone of the case. The court proceedings were solemn, emphasizing not just punishment, but the moral accountability that underpins any functioning society. And yet, the true lesson was not only in the consequences Clara faced. It was in the children's courage, their ability to observe, analyze, and act when fear threatened to paralyze them. It was in the parents' realization that trust, though essential, must always be paired with awareness and empathy. It was in the community's response, proving that vigilance and care can counteract even the darkest of manipulations. The household slowly returned to normal routines: dinner, homework, bedtime stories, but the family was changed. They were wiser, more attuned to the nuances of safety and human behavior. Max and Lily carried an inner strength that would not leave them, a quiet knowledge that even in moments of fear and powerlessness, action, intelligence, and unity can reclaim control. And in the larger sense, Clara's reckoning reinforced a profound truth: manipulation and abuse of trust may rise in secrecy, but they cannot survive exposure, courage, and moral accountability. The night's terror had ended, replaced by justice, not just the legal kind, but the kind that restores balance, teaches lessons, and strengthens the bonds of family, community, and conscience. The night that had begun as ordinary had ended with lessons that would echo for a lifetime. Max and Lily, once vulnerable children in the care of someone they trusted, had discovered the power within themselves to think, observe, and act. Their bravery had not been born of recklessness, but of courage tempered by intelligence, careful observation, and unwavering unity. The parents, too, had learned that trust, though essential, is never absolute. Vigilance and empathy must accompany it, because even the most ordinary facade can conceal danger. The ordeal had reminded them, and through them, the audience, that safety is a responsibility shared by children, adults, and community alike. Clara's reckoning, both legal and moral, served as a stark reminder that manipulation, control, and abuse of trust cannot endure in the light of accountability. Secrets, coercion, and fear may feel powerful in isolation, but they crumble when faced with courage, intelligence, and justice. Most importantly, the story affirmed a timeless truth. Strength is not the absence of fear, but the ability to confront it. Resilience, resourcefulness, and the courage to act, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can turn vulnerability into empowerment. The night's terror became, paradoxically, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to survive, to learn, and to triumph over darkness. As the Thompsons tucked themselves into bed that night, hearts still racing but filled with gratitude, one simple lesson lingered: the world may hold shadows, but courage, vigilance, and moral integrity can illuminate even the darkest corners. Fear can teach, but it is action, guided by conscience and empathy, that ensures justice prevails and innocence is protected. In the end, the ordinary night that shocked the world became a story not of terror alone, but of courage, accountability, and the enduring strength of the human heart. If you found the story meaningful, consider subscribing to Famous Crime Cases for more real-life investigation and human stories.